Zach, let me tell you a story. So they're mostly functional. It's based on specific tasks like hunting or guarding or herding or companionship. Companionship actually came up pretty early. There's a lot of relatively ancient dog breeds that come out of especially the China region that are, these are things like Shar-Peis and stuff like that that we kind of think of as modern breeds, but are uh, dogs that were bred for companionship even in antiquity. But also things like war, right? So there were war dogs, and any particular task that you might want a dog to be good at, humans started doing that, breeding for those particular tasks. But it was these broad categories that kind of came out of this time. So you have this protracted period of tens of thousands of years, literally more ancient than civilization. And you have just very broad categories of dogs that come out of this, not the particular breeds that we're used to nowadays. And dogs are really bred for a task and to suit the region and the environment that they're living in, right? So huskies, malamutes, those kinds of dogs look very wolf-like. They live in a similar environment to wild wolves that are kind of, it's called whole Arctic. It's the area in Eurasia and North America that's at very high altitudes. So they're very cold adapted, and they're bred for that environment. Whereas like a Chihuahua is bred for a very hot and arid environment in northern Mexico, right? So they're very different breeds that are based on the task and the environment that they're in. Very gradual process, and again based mostly on function, and that uh, and that continues on all the way until kind of like the modern era. So then we get into the modern era, which is really starting with Victorian era breeding kennel clubs in the UK. So this is kind of the mid to late 1800s in the UK, and it ends up expanding kind of all over the world because that's the way that the British Empire worked at the time. But Victorians had this.
The
Sorry, do
British
you want to
the
step
British
out of it?
Empire just want to just their whole existence is pop into a place, take it
Oh,
over, move on to the next place. Do you think they ever said like, why are we doing this? Why are
no,
we
I don't
going
think
every
they did.
I don't
No.
think they had a moment of like self-doubt. It was like, let's just
No.
go there and take it over. That sounds
Yeah.
fun.
Doesn't, yeah, I don't think they stopped even for a moment. They didn't stop until they were forced to stop. Yeah,
Yep.
that's how colonialism works.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, for sure. So they were in Victorian England was obsessed with breeding and breeding in this very particular manner. And it's kind of interesting with like the origin of modern science also starts picking up on these very specific animal breeds as well. So this is the area that you get really a lot of the modern breeds when we think about dog breeds. Most of the common dog breeds that you know of are derived from this part of the world at this time. Not all of them, but most of them, right? So like golden retrievers come from this area, spaniels come from this area. You get it moving out of England and into mainland Europe, and you start getting like German short-hair pointers and stuff like that. But that's really a continuation of the same practice. Victorian England, they're not just obsessed with breeding dogs. Uh, Cat breeds also come out of the same time. Mouse breeds. There's this whole tradition out of this time of pet fancy, is what they call it. So there's still like there's a magazine that's called Cat Fancy nowadays, and when you hear that, it sounds like quaint and old timey, and that's because it is. But that's what that term comes from, is that they're breeding fancy pets, right? So they're breeding fancy birds and fancy mice, and all of those things are kind of interconnected as just like a habit and a hobby. And actually, the modern lab mouse that is used in scientific research comes directly out of that mouse fancy tradition as well. So
Yeah.
there's another connection to science in there, but yeah, that's where
That's
all of these dog breeds come from.
I were they keeping mice as pets at that point and they needed
Yes.
fancier ones, or was it like there's all these mice in our houses because our hygiene is not as good as we think it is, but I would
Yeah.
like them to be cuter.
Uh-huh. Yeah, my understanding is that actually dogs and cats were seen as a manly pet to have. So a lot of the dog and cat breeding that occurred in Victorian England was coming from men. So there were men that were breeding dogs and cats because those are functional animals, and then mice and plants was kind of the thing for women because it was seen as like a smaller, like more feminine hobby. But yeah,
Hmm.
it's literally just like a hobby for the wealthy people in Victorian England, and that's where this tradition comes from. And this area of breeding is not slow and gradual like the ancient form, and it's not really based on function either. So this is a rapid process where you see over the course of like just a decade or two the establishment of each one of these individual breeds. And a lot of these breeds come from like one original breeder, right? There was like one guy who decided to make the golden retriever. There was one guy who decided to make the black lab,
Yeah,
right?
and he was a pervert. He was just like, you want to get those two dogs to have sex? I could do that. Don't
Right.
worry about it. Just give
Uh-huh.
me. I need some candles and I need somebody
Mhm.
playing a little violin music. We'll get it happening.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is also a culture that is obsessed with genealogy and heritage as well. So they're very into this closed breeding regime. So you're
Hmm.
not getting interbreeding of these dogs with wild populations, with populations from impoverished areas, with what we call them village dogs nowadays, which are basically just semi-domesticated but somewhat wandering breeds of dogs that are kind of not quite feral but not quite domestic either.
Sounds like my
So
dogs.
yeah,
My
exactly. Those dogs are
DAWG.
the
Yeah.
best. Yeah.
Those are my dogs right there. They're
Uh,
almost feral. These boys.
right. That's right. And they're obsessed with close breeding. They're obsessed with record keeping, right? And everything is based on like you can't have a dog that's accepted as part of this breed unless it's been documented to come from other dogs that are part of this breed, right? So it's a very rapid progression where you're developing these dog breeds. It's a very closed breeding system that is based on record keeping and documentation, generally with a very small number of founding individuals. So one of the things that you see coming out of this is that you see a lot of issues with inbreeding and genetic diseases, and that's something that affects our dogs nowadays to a lot. If you're a dog owner, you probably are aware that a lot of dogs are, especially of particular breeds, are prone to certain genetic conditions. So that's where that comes from. Before that, dogs were probably actually much healthier, um, but uh, but but the other aspect of it too is that this is a type of breeding that is really obsessed with the look of a dog, right? So a lot of the selection process here is not functional the way that it was before. There is still a little bit of that, and dogs are still bred to be a particular type, like this is a hunting breed or this is a herding breed. But the establishment of these breeds is really obsessed with the aesthetics of it. So aesthetics are really driving the way that these dogs are bred,
Yeah.
not
Doesn't.
health, not their
No.
ability to do a task. Yeah,
No, as long as it looks pretty, who cares if it has
mhm,
brittle bones and can barely
yeah,
stand or breathe, and its
yeah,
heart after
mm,
3 years explodes in its chest? It's like, oh, but it looked pretty when I carried it into the party. I took it to the debutante ball on a
yeah.
pillow with my
Mm.
rented pineapple, and I showed it off to the everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's an obsession with sticking to the description of the breed too, right? Like if you ever really want to drive yourself nuts as a dog owner, I think you go on any of these kennel club websites and read descriptions of a dog, and it's insane the level of detail that there is about a dog breed, and every single aspect of the dog's entire body is governed in a way that I think to my modern sensibilities is kind of distasteful, honestly. But that's the way that it is, and that's what's dominating the world of dog breeding nowadays. So there's some people pushing back on that too, but that's really where dogs stand genetically, right? So where ancient breeds led to these very broad categories, you get these modern breeds that are leading further and further into this very specific granular description of a very specific breed. There's like 120 something breeds, I think, that are recognized by most of the kennels, and some of them are a little bit bigger and some of them are a little bit smaller, but that's kind of like where it's at. Um, there are to talk a little bit more about these genetic diseases. There's really two problems with that breeding regime, and that is that there's a lot of founder effects and genetic bottlenecks, and that's kind of the main issue with inbreeding with any animal, is that you get a specific breed which is founded by just a small handful, maybe like a dozen different animals, males and females, and then any individual genetic mutation that might have occurred in those guys is then just going to be like restricted to just them, and the likelihood of any individual dog that's descended from them inheriting any of those genetic mutations that exist in there just kind of the odds of inheriting those mutations in later generations gets amplified. And if a new mutation pops up in that population, then uh, it's a closed breeding system, so it's very hard to kind of fully get rid of that genetic mutation using these kinds of breeding practices. Um, so uh, one of the things that is really interesting when you look at the genetic level with these animals is that something that you can do when you look at animal genetics is that you can figure out just from their genetic sequence what is called an effective breeding population. So you can kind of look at the genetics of lots of different individuals and you can see how many kind of unique genetic individuals are there within a given population. And I think a really interesting example of this in the wild is that if you look at elephant seals out in the wild, the way that they breed is that there will be a whole colony of elephant seals that will take over like a beach somewhere, and there will be thousands of individuals, and many males, many females, but they breed with harems where one dominant male might be surrounded by several dozen females, and he will interbreed with all of them. And most of the males actually don't get the opportunity to breed until they kind of survive long enough and grow long enough that they can become one of the dominant males. So what you end up with when you look at elephant seals is that even though you might have a population of like 1,000 for an individual colony, the actual effective population size, because so few of the males are actually breeding, is maybe like 40% of that, right?
Yeah,
Some of the
and that's
individuals are, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's why you have so much incel behavior in those seals. Is
And
like,
those seals, elephant seals, there's so many like incels that are just kind of off on the side, just starting their own alt-right podcast and talking
yeah,
about why like women don't respect them anymore.
yeah,
Mm.
they've gotten into looks maxing these days, and it's really it sucks to see all those seals on meth, but
I
it
know,
is what
yeah,
it is.
yeah. There's really a loneliness epidemic amongst the younger elephant seal population. It's really tragic to
Yeah.
see. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you might have a population of like 1,000 elephant seals, but the actual effective breeding population, just because of the way that they breed, is maybe only like 400 or something like that. It might actually be a little bit less because a lot of those individuals are related to each other, and if you have like siblings, they are going to share a lot of genetics. So they're not a completely unique individual genetically, right? Like I have a brother, you have a brother, and if you look at, me and my brother or you and your brother and you compare yourselves genetically, you guys share 50% of your genetics. So the two of you together or me and my brother together are not two completely unique genetic individuals, right? We're kind of like somewhere on the order of like 1.5 genetic individuals because we're full brothers, right? So so the same can happen at the population level within other individuals, but with dogs, because they're so restricted, they have this incredible restriction of effective breeding. So there was a study that was done looking at pugs in the UK, right? Pugs, little tiny like
Hmm.
stub-nosed dogs. That is that your dog in the background?
No, that's a neighbor's dog who started
Oh,
barking.
oh, nice.
There's a
Nice.
pug across the street that's just like, I hold on, I don't want to deal with the disrespect.
Perfect. It knows that we're talking about it. Yeah. So pugs in the UK, there was a study that was done on pugs in the UK, and it looked at 10,000 different pugs and looked at the total genetic variation amongst 10,000 pugs, and they found that it had an effective breeding population of about 70. That's how
Mm,
restricted the genetic pool is in pugs, right? For all 10,000 individuals, there's roughly the same amount of genetic variation as 70 individuals of like a wolf population or a wild dog population. Isn't that wild? 70.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's
Well,
not
the
unique to
thing
just
about
pugs.
pugs is they shouldn't exist. They were bred into the least efficient animal that ever existed.
Right.
Some some like British person in like the 1700s was like, "What if we had a dog that couldn't breathe and was so
Uh-huh.
squat it could barely walk? That sounds wonderful. Smoosh its nose in as far as possible."
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah,
And now we have
that's right.
that.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, so it's not unique to just pugs, though. So a similar study looked at golden retrievers and found that their effective breeding population was like 110, something like that. And boxers, also a similar study, found that their effective breeding population was about 70. So that's part of the reason why when you have dogs that are purebred in these breeds that they are so prone to genetic diseases is because they have such a restricted. It's hard to describe how big of an effect Victorian era kennel club breeding practices had on dogs genetically, but I think that's kind of like the best signal that really shows just how wild and crazy the effect was, because it's restricted their breeding so well. But yeah, so that's it for this time. We
Yeah.
Would you like to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, follow me on social media. On all of them at ZHJOBE. Yeah, I don't have a lot of interesting stuff going on. I have a couple performances, but who knows when you'll listen to this. So just check out my social media to see if I'm performing.
Fair enough. Yeah, and likewise for me, you can find me at Myelin, the YouTube channel Myelin on YouTube, or by following this podcast. This podcast is available on all major podcast platforms now: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. If you don't like that, then you can use link in the description to subscribe via RSS feed, like I do. And I also have a website called evolio.org. And thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
See ya. Zach, let me tell you a story.